Welcome to Illustrator 2, Paths and the Pen Tool. So let's first talk about paths. Paths are, these lines, all right? So a path is a straight line in between two anchor points. Here's anchor point, here's anchor point. When you hover over, you can actually see it pops up. It says path, it says anchor point, all right? So all artwork is made up of paths. You can consider this the skeleton, and it's the line segments that make the overall structure of what you create. So in understanding our objects that we're creating, we have our paths, but we also have our anchor points. And we can think of those as the joints that hold the structure together, aka it holds the skeleton together. So when an anchor point is blue, that means it's selected. So you can see all these are selected. But if I just select one, you can see that this one is blue, this one actually is not. This one is filled with white. To actually select multiple anchor points with the direct selection tool, which allows you to select one or more anchor points, you just click one, hold down shift, and then you can click another one and you can modify just those two. I'll talk about those later on in this tutorial. All right, so when working with paths, there are such a thing as an open and a closed path. So for example, shapes right here, any of these shapes that you draw, these are all closed paths. That means each path is joined with another path. But then we have other things such as the line tool, the spiral tool, and these are open paths. That means there's one point that's not connected to something else. You can see this is an open path and this is an open path, all right? So the difference between a closed path and open path is with a closed path, when you have the fill in the stroke, the fill fills in evenly, whereas with an open path, if you actually filled in the fill, you'll see it doesn't fill in evenly because there's no close to it. So, all right, so one thing that you can know that if you have two paths right here, you can actually join them together. If you go to Object, Path, Join, and you can see it actually joins these two paths together. So that's another thing that you can work with. So let's talk about the scissors tool and the knife tool. So you can see here I have a little pop out here. You get that from going to the eraser tool and holding down, and then you can pop up the panel. You have the scissor tool and the knife tool. And the scissor tool allows you to split paths based on anchor points that you select. So if the scissor tool allows you to split paths based on anchor points that you select, if I say take this object right here, then take my scissor tool, I select one and I select another, and you'll see, abracadabra, it is now two separate objects. However, if I take this object right here, which is an open path, and I select this one right here, it tells me, please use the scissors tool on a segment or anchor point, but not an endpoint of a path. So with open paths, this is considered an endpoint, and you can't use the scissor on that, but you could use the scissor on this one because it's not an open endpoint. So that's just a little difference right there. The knife tool can be more free form. So this is the knife tool. It's more free form, and you can just cut. And you can see now I have if I deselect, I now have two separate objects, and I have my free form sort of cut. If you want to make it a straight cut, just hold down the Option on a Mac and Alt on a PC, and then it's a straight line. But of course, you have to have your object selected. So have my object selected, hold down the Option or the Alt, and then my cut is straight. So that's a really sort of two handy little tools, the scissor tool and the knife tool. And how you get to those is you just go to your tool bowl right here and you look for your eraser. And you can see right here, this is the knife tool selected, but usually the eraser tool is selected. So this is where you'll be finding those tools, and they'll be coming pretty handy for you. So let's keep talking. One thing I do want to show you really quickly is if you're drawing your shapes, I'm drawing my shapes, it's looking so good. oh, you know what though? I really want to draw behind. I want to put like a sun like right behind my building or something like that. You don't have to like create a new layer or whatever. You could be working in the same sort of master layer, and instead you have down here a couple little options. One is draw normal, which means you just draw one on top of the other. The other is draw behind. So that means when I have something new that I'm going to be adding to my artwork, say rectangular tool, now it draws behind. If I select this, whoop, it draws behind. So just remember though, it will draw behind whatever you select, but if you have nothing selected, it will draw behind everything. So now it'll actually draw behind everything. So the draw behind tool can actually, like if you have this selected, this mode selected, it actually can come in pretty handy. Just remember that if you have something selected on your artboard, it will go behind just that object, but if you have nothing selected, it'll go behind everything. So that is different drawing mode. Now let's talk about creating compound paths. So if we go to the main menu and we go to Window and we go to Pathfinder, and you can also go to Transform and then it's in the same panel. This is a pretty handy tool, and this has a bunch of different options that can help you with sort of different things that you're doing. So we have Unite, which means it unites two different objects. We have the minus front, we have the intersect, we have the exclude, we have divide, we have trim, we have merge, we have crop. So I encourage you to play around with these, the different shape modes. They basically mean what they say. So, you know, like merge the top object with the bottom object, minus back subtracts the artwork and back from front. So the sort of title when you hover over means what it is. So for example, if I select this one, and I hit unite, bada bing, bada boom, it becomes one united object. So I encourage you to play around with these. All right, so for example, I'm gonna select this one, I'll select this one, and then I can hit exclude. Whoa, it's what's excluded. So that is a pretty handy thing. Just remember sometimes it groups them together, so you just have to ungroup, and then you have like these two separate objects. So I encourage you to play around with these. It's very powerful and very handy tool for you to use. So we've talked about, you know, different paths, we've talked about different objects. Now let's talk about the smooth tool and the path erase tool. So say you're drawing with the pencil tool, which by the way, if you double click on it, you can see there's tool options. It's not always the smoothest sort of line. And you know, if you are actually drawing with your like your mouse and not like a Wacom tablet, you probably want to increase the smoothness here if you're doing a lot of drawing. All right, but say you have a line right here and it's a little jaggedy, and you're like, oh, I kind of want to fix that. You can use the smooth tool, which allows you to draw along the same path and smooth what you've drawn by simplifying the path. And you'll notice these options, the smooth tool and the path erase tool, are available right here. So if I select the smooth tool, I select my path, I select my smooth tool, and then I draw along, you'll see it smooths my path by simplifying it. And I've set this setting to being a little bit more extreme, smoothest to 48%, my fidelity 4, but you can have the smoothest smaller and then have just more smaller changes. You know, you can play around with that. And now the path erase tool, you can see if I draw over that, it erases part of my path, which you know, can be very handy if you just want to erase from one point to another or just like one section of your path. But just make sure that you have things selected. So the path erase tool and the smooth tool are also two little sort of handy tools for you to use while you're working, and they're located right here underneath the pencil tool. And now let's talk about one thing that kind of can be a little tricky but is very, very handy, and I encourage you to use in Can you guess what that is? It's the pen tool. So here's the pen tool and all the pen tool options. I'm just going to pop those out. So the pen tool. With the pen tool, you can draw curves, straight lines, closed path, open path. So I can draw from, you click on the screen, you set your first anchor point, then you click another screen, and you have a straight line. Now if you hold down Shift, it will draw a 90-degree point. So that's something that's handy for you to know. And if you go all the way to the end, you'll notice that there is now a circle. That means you're closing the path, right? But if you were, say, to draw with the pen tool, dun, 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 it doesn't have to be closed. So it can be closed or it doesn't have to be closed, all right? And again, you hold down the shift key and you click, and it'll give you a 90-degree angle. So you are creating anchor points with a pen tool, and then you can actually modify them with this tool right here, which you might have noticed looks just like our selection tool. This is the direct selection tool, which allows you to select a specific anchor point and then actually modify just that anchor point. And that's one of the things that is beneficial about using a pen tool and creating our own shapes versus predetermined shapes, is that you have a lot more options in terms of sort of control. So that's something handy to know, is that with the direct selection tool, and you can select one or more by holding Shift, is that you can sort of change just part of your object. Whereas if you select it with the regular selection tool, you'd be sort of adjusting all of the points. So that's something to remember. So now let's talk about simple curves. If you have the pen tool selected, again, if you go from one point to another, it's a straight line. But if you go and you click and hold down, you'll notice now I have something else happening. And this is how you make curves. So by holding down your mouse, you can now have sort of control over making curves. And remember opposites. So if I go up, my curve goes down. I go down, my curves go up. Now, hold on, wait a minute. If I now try to make another point, oh, it's going curved. So something to remember is that in order to make another straight line after having a curve, you need to reset your anchor point. And that just means taking your pen tool, going back to the anchor point that you're just at, and holding down the Option or Alt key. And then that resets it to being a straight line. So that's something that's a little tricky, but you got to remember that if you draw a curve, you then have to go back to that anchor point, hold down Alt or Option, and just reset that anchor point, so then now it can be straight. Okay? Now, if you want to make an S-curve, what you have to do is the first point that you're creating is just make that a curve, and then the next one you create is make a curve, go the opposite direction, and there you go, you have a curved line, an S shape. Now if you're wondering, what are all these other tools up here? We have the Add Anchor Point, the Delete Anchor Point, and the Convert Anchor Point. Now, the Add Anchor Point and Delete Anchor Point are kind of easily understandable because it's a pen tool with a plus and a pen tool with a minus, and that means if I'm going here, I can add an anchor point, which maybe will help you give some more sort of finite control over your object. And same thing goes with minus. You can just delete an anchor point. So those are two sort of tools that are very handy, but sort of very easy to understand. Now, the convert anchor point is a little bit different. So this tool converts corners to curves and curves into corners. So with the convert anchor point tool, you can click on an anchor point, and say I have an anchor point that is a corner, I can now make it into a curve. And if I have an anchor point that's a curve, I can now make it into a corner. So that's a handy little tool that you can use when you're actually making things. So, and there's also useful shortcuts, which are P, plus sign, minus sign, and Shift C for convert tool. And also the C for scissors. So those are some more handy tools for you to have. I encourage you to use the pen tool and play around. And that's all we're learning for today.